All right, so get this. We're diving deep today into a mystery that's, well, it's one of those that just grabs you and won't let go.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the Yuba County Five, ever heard of it?
I have, actually. It's quite a story.
It is. And you sent over a ton of stuff, articles, reports, even a whole podcast episode on it.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to unpack there.
For sure. So let's see if we can maybe make some sense of this whole thing, you know? Five guys just vanish, their car turns up in the middle of nowhere, and then months later it gets even worse. Really tragic stuff.
It's the kind of case that sticks with you,
Yeah.
like a real-life puzzle, but nobody has the solution.
Exactly. And it all starts with these five friends, Jackie Hewitt, Bill Sterling, Jack Madruga, Ted Weir, and Gary Mathias, all from Yuba City, California.
Right? A tight-knit group.
There's love.
Loved sports active in their community.
Yeah. And just so you know, these guys all had some intellectual disabilities or mental health challenges, but that doesn't mean they weren't living full lives, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things that makes this whole disappearance so strange.
Right. So it's February 1978. These five friends decide to head out to a college basketball game in Chico.
A trip they'd made before? Nothing unusual about it.
Exactly. It's not like they were going on some crazy adventure. They knew the route, they loved basketball. They were even seen at a convenience store in Chico right after the game.
Just normal guys hanging out, grabbing some snacks.
Totally. But little did anyone know that would be one of the last times anyone saw them. And here's where things start to get really weird.
A few days later, right?
Yeah, a few days later, their car, a 1969 Mercury Montego, is found abandoned. But not just anywhere. It's in the snow on some remote road in Plumas National Forest,
Plumas National Forest, that's way off course.
almost 70 miles from Chico.
Whoa, okay, so they're 70 miles off course in the snow.
Yeah, and that's the first big red flag. What were they doing there? Trying to take a shortcut? Did they get lost? And why abandon a perfectly good car?
Right, that's the thing. The car itself could have been driven out of the snow. It was in working condition, no damage.
But the keys were gone.
The keys were missing. And one window was rolled down, unlocked too, which apparently was totally unlike Jack Madruga. He owned the car.
His parents said he hated the cold and had never even been to that part of Plumas National Forest. Sterling had been there once to fish, but he didn't like it.
So why were they there? Seriously, what in the world were they doing in Plumas National Forest?
It's a good question, and the more you think about it, the more questions pop up. Like you said, it's a real puzzle.
Yeah. And don't forget, this was 1978. Search and rescue technology wasn't what it is today. Finding missing people in a place like Plumas National Forest, that was a needle in a haystack situation.
So for months, there was nothing. No sign of the guys, no clues, just silence. Then the snow melts in June 1978, and that's when things take a really heartbreaking turn.
That's when they find Ted Waiter's body.
Yeah, in a Forest Service trailer miles from the car. He died from starvation and exposure.
Terrible way to go.
Hold on a sec. A trailer with supplies and he died of starvation? Something's not adding up here.
That's what's so strange about Weir's death. The trailer had food rations, blankets, heating supplies.
Why didn't he use any of it?
It's the biggest mystery surrounding Weir. Was he too disoriented? Was something stopping him from getting to those supplies? We just don't know.
The articles mention hypothermia can really mess with your mind, you know? Confusion, disorientation, even hallucinations.
Oh yeah, I've heard of that.
Could that explain why he didn't use the supplies? Like maybe he didn't even realize the danger or understand how to use what was there?
Possibly, hypothermia can make it really hard to think straight. Make rational decisions.
So we've got one death, a trailer full of unused supplies, and still no sign of the other four men. It's like this case just gets more confusing with every detail.
It gets worse, unfortunately. The discoveries, they didn't stop there.
Oh, no.
Yeah, just a day after they found Weir, they found Madruga and Sterling.
Oh, jeez.
Miles from the car, too.
Mhm.
And they both died from hypothermia.
3 out of the 5 gone, all from the cold.
And then a few days later, they find Jackie Hewitt's remains. Just skeletal remains.
So he died from exposure, too.
Looks like it.
It's just crazy to me. 3 of them died from the elements, even though they were relatively close to shelter and supplies.
Yeah.
You gotta wonder if something happened that stopped them from getting into that shelter or using those supplies.
Yeah, that's a natural thought. And that's where the stuff they found inside that trailer with Weir gets really important.
Right, like those sea rations you mentioned.
Exactly. Some of them had been eaten.
Okay.
But get this, a whole locker full of food, a year's worth, was untouched.
Wait, a whole year's worth of food. So someone was in that trailer long enough to eat some rations, but not enough to open that locker.
Right. It's like they were carefully rationing their food or something.
And what about the fireplace and the winter clothes?
Unused. Both of them. The fireplace was cold, and the clothes were just sitting there.
Yeah.
Doesn't really fit with the idea that they were just lost and confused, right?
Right. It's like they were there for a while, but almost like they chose not to use everything available.
Exactly. It adds a whole new layer of mystery to the case.
So if they weren't just lost and confused, what were they doing? And what about Gary Mathias? He was never found, right?
Nope, never found him. And that's another huge question mark in this whole thing.
He just vanished.
Gone without a trace. But here's another thing. They found his tennis shoes in the trailer. Mathias's shoes.
No way. So at least 4 of them were in that trailer.
At least 4. Plus those sea rations that were eaten, they'd been opened with a military-style can opener.
And that's significant because...
Madruga and Mathias both served in the military.
Yeah.
They would have known how to use a can opener like that.
Okay, so now we have even more evidence pointing to them being in the trailer. This is getting weirder and weirder.
It is. It really is. And it raises even more questions about what they were doing there and why they didn't use more of the supplies.
And why Mathias disappeared. Did he go for help? Did something happen to him?
No one knows. He just vanished.
You know, there's another thing that's always bothered me about this case. The sheets on Weir's body. Who put those there? If he was alone and delirious, he wouldn't have covered himself up. It's like someone was there with him taking care of him.
That's a really good point. It's a small detail, but it's significant. It makes you think that maybe someone was there trying to help.
Right. It doesn't fit with the idea of them just being lost and panicking.
Exactly. It adds a layer of compassion to the story.
Okay, so we've got the car, the trailer, the unused supplies. Now we have to talk about the witness accounts. They're all over the place.
Oh yeah, those witness accounts. They make this case even more confusing.
It's like every time we get a new piece of information, it just creates more questions.
Let's start with Joseph Shananes. He's the guy who said he was stranded near their abandoned car the same night they disappeared.
Okay, so Shanane said he was having a heart attack trying to get his car out of the snow. Saw headlights and people near his car. Even a woman with a baby.
Yeah. He called for help, but they just turned off their lights and went quiet.
Okay, but hold on a sec. Didn't Weir's mom say he and Sterling were always helping people? Like, they even helped someone who overdosed once?
She did say that. It doesn't really sound like them to ignore someone who needs help,
Right,
especially not someone like Shones who was clearly in trouble.
right. So what's the deal with that?
Well, we have to remember, Shones was having a heart attack. He was probably delirious.
True.
He even admitted he wasn't sure about everything he saw. He thought he saw a pickup truck too, but he couldn't be certain.
All right, so maybe his memory was a little fuzzy. But then there's that other witness, the one in Brownsville.
Oh, yeah. That's a strange one.
Remind me about that. That was the store clerk who said she saw 4 of the men a day after they disappeared, right?
That's the one. She said she saw them with a red pickup truck.
Not their car.
Nope. A different truck entirely.
And didn't she say something about them using the phone booth?
2 of them were using the phone booth outside. The other 2 came into the store.
And the store owner backed up her story. Said he could even identify Weir and Hewitt.
Yep. Said they bought burritos, chocolate milk, and soda. Very specific details.
So if that sighting is true, that means at least 4 of them were alive and moving around after their disappearance. But why were they in a different vehicle? Who was driving? And why Brownsville?
Great questions.
Yeah.
And the answers. Well, nobody knows. But it's definitely something to think about.
It's like every piece of evidence just creates more questions. And all this time later, it's hard to tell what really happened.
Absolutely. Memories get distorted. Details get mixed up. And without any hard evidence, it's all just speculation.
So where do we go from here? We've got a car, miles off course, a body in a trailer with a bunch of unused supplies, conflicting witness accounts, and a missing guy. It's like trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing.
It really is a puzzle, isn't it? Like we're in a maze with invisible walls and the paths keep changing. But even with all this stuff, there's some explanations we can think about. Although, like with everything else in this case, we can't be totally sure.
So what are some of the main theories then? What are the best guesses about what might have happened to these guys?
Well, one theory is they just got lost. Maybe took a wrong turn trying to find a shortcut or visit someone, ended up deep in the forest without realizing how far off course they were.
That would make sense with their disabilities. Maybe they couldn't really understand what was happening or make good decisions under pressure.
Exactly. And remember, it was winter with snow everywhere. Super easy to get disoriented in those conditions, especially if you don't know the area well.
What about that theory that someone led them into the mountains? Maybe someone who wanted to hurt them?
We can't rule out foul play, can we?
We can't. There are some things about this case that are really suspicious. The abandoned car, the supplies of witnesses. but we don't have any real evidence of foul play. So for now, it's just a theory.
You mentioned earlier that Matthias maybe had friends in Forbestown. Could they have been going to see them and gotten lost?
It's possible. Or maybe they saw those snowcat tracks and thought they would lead them to some kind of shelter or back to civilization. So a wrong turn following the snowcat tracks, trying to reach friends in Forbestown, all possibilities. But what about the trailer? Why not use the supplies if they were desperate?
Well, some people think they might have been afraid to because they thought it was private property,
Mm.
you know, not wanting to steal or anything.
That's interesting. They might have been hesitant to touch anything if they thought it belonged to someone else. It's like being too polite, even when your life is on the line.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then there's the question of Weir. Why didn't he use those supplies even when he was alone in the trailer? We talked about hypothermia, but maybe he was just too weak to even get to them.
Man, that's just sad to think about. And Matthias, if he was alive, why didn't he go get help for Weir?
Well, one theory is that after Weir died, Matthias was in shock or really upset and tried to find help, but got lost himself. Imagine that after Weir died, lost in the wilderness alone and maybe struggling with his schizophrenia.
That's a scary thought.
It is. It really highlights how sometimes, even when we try our best to figure things out, some mysteries just stay unsolved. We might never know for sure what happened to Gary Matthias or why those men ended up in Plumas National Forest.
It's hard to accept that, but you're right. We've
Yeah.
looked at all the evidence, explored the theories, and we still have more questions than answers.
But I think that's part of what makes this case so fascinating. It makes us realize that we don't know everything, and that some things will always remain a mystery.
It also reminds us how fragile life is, how important it is to be kind to each other, and how much love families have, that they never give up hope, even when something terrible happens.
The Yuba County Five might be a cold case, but their story is still important. It makes us wonder what if and try to figure out the mysteries that might never be solved.
It shows us that even though we live in a world that wants answers all the time, some questions might never get answered. And maybe there's something beautiful about that. The Yuba County Five reminds us that sometimes the most interesting stories are the ones that leave us searching for the truth, even when that truth is hard to find. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's been a real trip.